Hey everyone, Sue here from One A Auto, and today we have a 2013 Toyota Camry in the shop, and I'm going to show you how to replace the lower front ball joint. If you need any parts for your car, click on the link below and head on over to oneaauto.com. So to take the tire off, you need a 19mm socket. Take your tire off. Now we're going to take the old cotter pin out of the lower ball joint because we're going to have to discard that. The new ball joint will come with one. And go from there. I just use a pair of cutters. See if I can get it to line up. Make itself a little free in there. Sometimes there's a little ear you can grab from the other side. This one's going to be, it's probably been in their original equipment. Yeah, I got it to move. Good. I can feel the other end with my hand, and I can feel it moving. You'll see the other end now has a little bit more of a lip to it. I can just grab it with the cutters and then pull it out. Perfect. There you go. The nuts on the spindle part of the ball joint are pretty good, so I can only fit an open end wrench on there. So I'm just going to give it a quick tap. See if I can get it to jolt itself a little free. Notice how I keep my hand on that. If you take your hand off of it and try to hit that, the wrench could just bounce off and hit you. Let's go to the other side. There we go. So it's mostly the vibration of the hammer, not so much the effort of trying to spin the wrench around it. We'll get this off as far as we can go before it hits the axle, and then I'll take the bolts off on the control arm side. And we'll take a pickle fork because we're not going to reuse it, so we can use a pickle fork and break that down. I'm going to take these 3 bolts, 2 nuts and 1 bolt out, 17mm socket. I'm going to use my 1/2-inch breaker bar. You can use air tools if you have air tools at home. I'm going to show you, if you don't have air tools, how to do it. And it can be relatively easy. You can see the pressure as the control arm's going up. That's where the pressure point is. The ball joint pushes it down. Then we can get our pickle fork. I'll just pull down on this. Get that out of the way. You take a hammer actually before you get the pickle fork. If you hit right in here, you might be able to jolt that free. We'll hit that pickle fork and go that way. This might not work, it might be the wrong size. There you go. Now, if you're reusing that ball joint, you want to try to not use the pickle fork because you can rip the boot just like that. So if you're reusing the ball joint and you need to take it out for some reason, I don't recommend doing it that way. In this case, we're replacing it, so we can just destroy it. Oh, the crease. There we go. So now on a Toyota, the axle nut or spindle nut is a special socket. It has to be a 12.30mm, so you can. It's a, you have to order it or make sure you have one before you do a Toyota axle. For the spindle nut. I'll take that off. Set that aside. And I'm going to spray a little bit penetrating spray in there so that I can hopefully hammer that axle out of the knuckle. Hit the spindle part and get the CV axle shaft out. So here we have our original factory ball joint for our Camry and the replacement from our TRQ line at 1A Auto. And it's nice. I like the pressed in studs, threaded rod. It's got the R on it, just like the factory one, to make sure you know that it's the right side lower ball joint. New boot, of course, spindle, new castle nut, and new mounting hardware. That's really nice. Has the same angle. If you need this part or any other part for your car, click on the link below and head on over to 1aauto.com. I'm going to put the new lower ball joint in. Now I think it's going to be easier for me to fish it up into the knuckle and then put it into the lower control arm. So I want this spindle piece turned in as far as I can that way. So I've got it at this angle, so that way I can hopefully work this in. The backing plate probably won't hurt to bend it a little bit. We'll just have to bend it back. There we go. Get that castle nut and put it back on. Now I'm going to try to torque this down before I put the axle in, because then I can use an actual socket. So the new nut on the ball joint is a 21 millimeter. The old one was a 19. Now the torque specs for this is 91 foot-pounds. So do I want to leave the CV shaft in and tighten it like I would if I was just doing the ball joint? You could, but at the same time, you're not going to get 91 foot-pounds out of that. So it's just as easy to take the axle nut out, whether you're doing the knuckle bearing or not. Just take the axle nut out, slide it out, helps you do the whole job probably a little easier, and you can actually use a socket, take the old one out. So I'm going to be able to torque that now to 91 foot-pounds. So I'm going to tighten this lower ball joint castle nut. It's a 21 millimeter socket, and I put my 1/2-inch breaker bar in there because the torque is 91 foot-pounds, which is really high. And I'm going to use a pry bar and put it right through where the axle would go through. It's not going to do any damage to it, and that way I can get some good leverage on this and torque this right down. Let's see if the cotter pin lines up. So it's pretty close. I lucked out on that one. Now I'll just put that new cotter pin through. Grab my... I'm going to pull the top one over. Cut off the excess. And then I'll spin the side around, and I'll get this side over here. Now we're clear to put the axle back through the center of the bearing. Line up the spindles, and at the same time, I'm going to line up the lower ball joint to the control arm. There you go. Get a pry bar. With a pry bar, I can pull down on the control arm. We have the two new lock nuts. They've got the lock washers on them. It's got a reverse little grooves in them that once it's torqued down, tightened, it doesn't back off. And then our one bolt that goes through the top one. Make sure you start everything by hand so you don't cross thread it. So we're going to tighten the lower ball joint to control arm with the 2 nuts and the 1 bolt. The 2 nuts are an 18mm socket. When torquing down the ball joint to the control arm, the manufacturer gives you 2 choices of replacement nuts, and it's a wider nut or a thinner nut. The thinner walled nut is 55 foot-pounds, and the wider based nut is 68 foot-pounds. We have the wider base here, so I'm going to go with 68. Put my 18mm socket on there and torque this to 68 foot-pounds. And then this 1 bolt is a 15mm socket. So before we put our new axle nut on, apparently I hit it a little too hard. That's why you really should use a center punch, but sometimes you just use a hammer, and I just knurled over the end thread just a hair. So I want to show you how to take care of that. I have a triangle file here, just a 3-sided file, and I'm going to find that where it's flattened over. I'm going to put it right in that groove, and I'm just going to file forward. And it just takes that enough off of it so that the new thread will correct itself. Now that we corrected our threads in the beginning here, we can put the new nut on. I'm going to use an air gun to get it down just before the hub, because I have to torque this to the manufacturer's specs with a torque wrench. You don't want to over tighten it with an air gun, because that's a pressed in bearing and you'll actually compress the housing and the bearing will get wasted real fast. And you don't want to leave it too loose, because then the bearing has play and you'll end up defeating the whole point of it. So in order to put enough torque on this spindle nut, I need to stop the wheel from turning. So I'm taking my longest pry bar and I'm putting it through the lug nuts. I'm going to take my 12.30mm socket. Yeah. Now that tells me that when I used my air gun earlier, I didn't even come close to bottoming out, which makes me happy because I didn't want to. So bravo to me, I did a good job. And torque specs is 217 foot-pounds. So before you torque the axle nut, you want to make sure your car is still in neutral, not in park, because in park you're actually putting strain on the axle. Makes sense, and it goes into the gear section of the transmission. And 217 foot-pounds can be too much, and you might actually do some gear damage, chip a gear. So make sure it's in neutral so that the pry bar takes the initial pull of the 217 foot-pounds. Now take your lug nuts off so you can remount your tire. Last step before you put your wheel on, you're going to take a punch and a hammer and push down on this. It's a little tin piece out here and it stops it from backing off. Just want it enough so it sits right in that groove and stops it from moving. 19mm socket. I'm going to hand tighten all the lug nuts, then I'll lower it down and torque it. I'm going to start at the bottom and I'm going to go in a star pattern. And the wheel torque for this Camry is 76 foot-pounds. Double check everything.
Thanks for watching. Visit 1AAuto.com for quality auto parts shipped to your door, the place for DIY auto repair. And if you enjoyed this video, please click the subscribe button.